Family desired me to marry my rich cousin in preference to my jobless fiancé. I refused and was kicked out. A year later, my cousin is in prison, and I'm thankfully married and pregnant. I, 26F, had been with my fiancé, Lance, 27M, for 5 years. For some context, I come from a totally conventional and, frankly, cash-obsessed family. My mom, 52F, has always been clear about her priorities, wealth and status. My dad, 55M, is more laid back but still leans heavily on my mom for decision-making. I have a younger sister, Rita, 24F, who is the golden child. She's never worked a day in her life and is more than happy to reap the benefits of our parents' money. Then there's Kyle, 27M, my cousin, who's extremely wealthy and always the apple of my mother's eye. Kyle and I grew up together, and while I've never had feelings for him, my mother has been hinting at me marrying him since we were teenagers. He is successful, owns several properties, and has a business empire, according to my mom, making him the perfect husband. But I've always made it clear that I didn't want to marry for money, and I love Lance with all my heart. Our wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. We had everything planned, the venue, the dress, and even the honeymoon. Lance and I worked hard to make it happen, despite our limited finances compared to what my mother wanted. She insisted on adding extravagant elements, but I pushed back because I didn't want her money to overshadow the love and effort Lance and I were putting into this special day. The tension was already building. My mother had this idea that weddings should be grand, opulent events, something to brag about to her friends. But I was more interested in celebrating our love with close family and friends. Then came Lance's job loss, and everything changed. 1 week before the wedding, Lance came home looking exhausted. His company had gone through massive layoffs, and unfortunately, Lance's department was one of those hit hard. I could see the guilt in his eyes as he told me the news. He kept apologizing, thinking he had let me down right before our wedding. But honestly, I wasn't mad at him. I was scared, but not because of the wedding. I knew how much this job meant to him. We decided to postpone the wedding. Lance wanted to find another job quickly so we could still go through with it soon. But I didn't care how long it took. I love him, and I know that no matter what, we'll get through it together. My family's reaction was a different story. When I told my mom about the job situation and our decision to delay the wedding, she flipped out. She started talking about how it was a sign that Lance wasn't good enough for me. Then she said something that left me speechless. She suggested I marry Kyle instead. According to her, this was the perfect opportunity to secure my future. Marrying Kyle would solve all my problems, financial security, family pride, and she'd be thrilled to show off at a grand wedding. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I love Lance, and the thought of abandoning him because of a financial setback was absurd. So, I refused. And marrying my cousin? That's just gross. But my mother didn't stop there. She gave me an ultimatum. I had 1 month to rethink my decision, or I'd be out of the house. I couldn't believe it. The room I had called my own for 26 years was suddenly up for grabs. She told me that Rita would be moving into it because I wouldn't need so much space anymore. It felt like she was pushing me out, not just from the house but from the family itself, all because I wouldn't marry Kyle. To add insult to injury, my sister Rita jumped at the chance to take over my room. She's always been spoiled and entitled, but this was a new low. She walked into my room the day after my mother's ultimatum and started measuring it for her new furniture. She didn't even ask if I was leaving. She just assumed I'd give up my life with Lance to marry Kyle. I tried talking to my mom again, but she stood by her decision. According to her, I'd be throwing my life away if I didn't marry into wealth, and she wasn't going to support me if I didn't make the right choice. My dad didn't say much, just the usual passive agreement with my mom. I confronted Rita about taking over my room before I'd even made a decision, and she just shrugged. Well, you'll be gone soon anyway, so why does it matter? She said with this smug look on her face. It hurt more than I'd like to admit. She's always been the favorite, but this was next level betrayal. After the confrontation, I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer, so I decided to move in with Lance. Despite the uncertainty of our financial future, we might not have much right now, but we have each other, and that's enough for me. I started packing my essentials, and while my mom noticed what I was becoming, but she failed to attempt to stop me, she simply watched. Rita, on the other hand, became practically giddy about getting my room. Moving out of my formative years' home was tough, but what was tougher was realizing how little my family valued my happiness. They were more concerned about appearances and money than the fact that I had found someone who truly loves me. Lance was supportive through all of this. He felt guilty, thinking he'd caused this rift in my family. However, I told him that none of this was his fault. This was my family's decision, not ours. Ida, for refusing to marry my cousin and choosing to move in with my fiancé despite his financial struggles, replaced one moving in with Lance. It was the right choice for me, but it wasn't without its challenges. We were barely getting by with Lance's savings and my modest income. It was tough adjusting from planning a beautiful wedding to figuring out how to pay rent. Some days, I wondered if we'd made the right choice, especially with the stress from my family looming over us. Lance was applying for jobs left and right, but the market was tough. There were days he would come home dejected, and it broke my heart to see him feeling so defeated. We agreed to shrink our wedding plans and focus on saving money until we could afford a small ceremony. Even though it wasn't the grand affair I once envisioned, I was content knowing that we'd be married, even if it was in a courthouse with only a few friends. Meanwhile, my mother and Rita were thriving, at least they thought they were. My mom made sure to remind me every chance she got that I was making a huge mistake. Every time I would talk to her on the phone, which was getting rarer and rarer, she'd casually mention Kyle, how he had just bought another property or expanded his business. It was as if she was trying to convince me that I still had time to change my mind. Rita, on the other hand, made herself at home in my old room. She'd redecorated and even sent me pictures of her new space, clearly trying to rub salt in the wound. The worst part was the smug pleasure in her voice whenever she talked about how cozy and expensive her life was at home. It was clear that she and my mother felt like they had won somehow. Surprisingly, my dad reached out to me more than I expected. He never outright said it, but I think he felt guilty about the way my mother and Rita had treated me. A few times, he quietly slipped me some cash to help with rent and groceries, saying it was a gift and not to tell my mother. While I appreciated his help, it was a stark reminder that he was unwilling to stand up to my mom or Rita. As for Kyle, he was furious that I had turned down the chance to marry him. I didn't hear this directly from him but through my mother and other family members. It became clear that he took my refusal personally. He thought that marrying him was the best choice for both of us and felt insulted that I chose Lance over him, especially when Lance was now unemployed. It didn't help that my mom kept fanning the flames, constantly telling Kyle that I was making a huge mistake and how disappointing the family was. In the end, Kyle stopped hiding his feelings and even started making veiled threats toward Lance and me. He warned me through our family that I would regret my decision and made it known that he wasn't going to be as forgiving as I thought. As the weeks went by, I started hearing more troubling rumors about Kyle. It seems his successful business wasn't as legitimate as he liked to make people believe. There were whispers within the family that Kyle had been involved in some fraudulent activities, manipulating contracts and forging documents to secure a portion of his wealth. The cousin that my mother had been pushing so hard for me to marry was a con artist. At first, I didn't believe it, but as the rumors grew louder and more frequent, I realized there was truth to it. It became public knowledge within our extended family that Kyle's business was under investigation, and he was being sued by several clients who had been scammed. My mom was in complete denial. She refused to believe that her perfect nephew could do something so wrong. After I confronted her about it, she brushed it off, saying that people were just jealous of Kyle's success and were trying to bring him down. But I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. The scandal hit my family hard. My mom, who had spent so much time praising Kyle and pushing me to marry him, went quiet when the news broke that Kyle might face criminal charges. She panicked and began calling me more frequently, but this time the tone was different. She wasn't gloating about how much better my life could have been with Kyle, she was almost begging me to stay connected to the family, as if she needed to hold on to some experience of my dad, then again, remained remote but supportive, I suppose. He usually had doubts about Kyle's success, but he never voiced them. Now that Kyle was exposed, my dad quietly stood by me, offering more financial support whenever he could. However, it was clear that he was torn between supporting me and maintaining peace with my mother. Rita, who had always idolized Kyle, had her world shattered. She was so wrapped up in his wealth and success that she couldn't see the truth. She went into damage control mode, trying to protect her own reputation, but it was clear that her influencer dreams were slipping away. No one wanted to partner with someone linked to a scandal. The final nail in the coffin came when Kyle was officially arrested on charges of fraud. The whole family was thrown into chaos. My mother was devastated. Everything she had built up in her mind about Kyle came crashing down, and she was left scrambling to figure out how to save face. She reached out to me, asking if I would reconsider reconnecting with the family and attending some family gatherings to smooth things over. I was taken aback. After everything that had happened, she still thought I'd come back into the fold as if nothing had changed. I refused. Now, I find myself in a different position. My relationship with my family is fractured, but I feel free. Lance and I are struggling, but at least we're building something real, unlike the facade that my family clung to for so long. Despite everything, Lance and I decided to go ahead with our wedding. We had put it off long enough, and even though things were not ideal, we didn't want to wait for the perfect moment anymore. We chose a small, intimate garden wedding ceremony, nothing like the grand event we had originally planned, but it felt more personal and real to us. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. It was held in the backyard of Lance's parents' house, which they graciously offered for the occasion. The guest list was short: close friends, some supportive family members from Lance's side, and my dad. My mother and Rita were noticeably absent. I didn't expect them to come after everything that had happened, and honestly, I didn't want them there. Walking down the aisle, I didn't feel any of the regret or hesitation that my family had tried to instill in me. Lance looked at me like I was the only person in the world, and at that moment, nothing else mattered. My dad walked me down the aisle, and even though he wasn't very vocal about his emotions, I could tell that he was proud of me for standing up for what I wanted. He even gave a little speech during the reception, which, knowing my dad, was a big deal. It was brief and simple, but it brought tears to my eyes. He said, "I've always believed that love should guide us, not money or reputation. I'm proud of Lucy for choosing love." It was all I needed to hear. One surprise at the wedding came in the form of Kyle's parents. They had been quite quiet during the whole fallout with my family, but on the day of the wedding, they showed up unexpectedly. I wasn't sure how to feel when I saw them there, but they approached me with nothing but kindness. Kyle's parents were embarrassed by their son's actions, and they wanted to express regret for how everything had turned out. They explained that they had no idea about Kyle's fraudulent activities and were ashamed of how things had spiraled. They also made it clear that they had tried to stay out of the drama my mother had stirred up, but now they wanted to extend an olive branch. They even presented us with a wedding gift, a very generous one. It was unexpected to say the least. They gave us a check to help with our future, something they said was a gesture to make up for all the chaos Kyle had caused. Lance and I were both taken aback by their generosity, but we accepted it graciously. It was one of the few moments in this whole mess where I felt like things were finally settling down. After the wedding, Lance and I moved into a modest apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours. We both agreed that we wanted to start fresh, away from the expectations of my family and the drama that had surrounded us for months. Our focus was on building a life together, one that wasn't defined by money or status. Lance eventually landed a new job a few weeks after the wedding, and while it wasn't as high-paying as his previous one, it was a fresh start. He was happier, less stressed, and it felt like we were slowly getting back on our feet. We started saving for the future, talking about the things we wanted to achieve together. We were focusing on our careers and our relationship, planning for the future. While it has been a struggle, I wouldn't change a thing. We may not have the wealth that my family always dreamed of, but we have something better, a relationship built on love, trust, and mutual respect. To me, that is invaluable. It's been a year since our wedding, and looking back, it feels like a lifetime ago that we were dealing with the chaos caused by my family. Lance and I have been through so much, and despite all the challenges, we've come out stronger than ever. For our first anniversary, Lance surprised me with a romantic dinner at a quiet little restaurant in town. It wasn't anything extravagant, but that's what I loved about it. Just the two of us, reflecting on the past year and how far we've come. I remember sitting there, holding his hand, feeling so grateful for everything we had overcome together. We toasted to love, resilience, and our future. The best part of the night wasn't even the dinner. After we got home, Lance shared some fantastic news. He had just been promoted at his job. It wasn't just a small promotion either. This one came with a significant pay boost and more stability. He had worked so hard over the past year to rebuild his career, and I couldn't be prouder of him. This promotion felt like a symbol of everything we had gone through together, a sign that better days were finally here. I wish I could say that my family had completely stayed out of our lives, but they hadn't. Over the past few months, my mom has been making more and more attempts to reach out. She's been calling and sending messages, trying to make amends. She even went as far as sending a card on our anniversary, congratulating us and saying she was ready to move forward. Rita, too, has been trying to get back in my good graces. She reached out a few times, generally with half-hearted apologies about the way she acted during the whole Kyle situation. She admitted that she had been jealous of the attention I received from Lance, jealous of the independence I had, and even jealous that I had the strength to stand up to my family. While part of me wanted to believe that they were genuine, I wasn't so quick to forgive after everything they put me through. It wasn't that simple. I didn't want to cut them out of my life completely, but I also didn't trust them the way I used to. So I decided on a cautious approach. I agreed to limited contact with both of them, text messages and brief phone calls, but nothing more. I needed time to heal from the hurt they caused, and I wasn't going to let them waltz back into my life as if nothing had happened. Just when I thought life couldn't get any more surprising, I found out I was pregnant. Lance and I had talked about starting a family, but we weren't actively trying. So when I took that pregnancy test and saw the positive result, I was in complete shock. The first person I told, of course, was Lance. I'll never forget the look on his face when I showed him the test, pure joy and disbelief. Suddenly, he hugged me so tightly that I could barely breathe, and for the first time in a long time, everything just felt perfect. We laughed, we cried, and then we started talking about our future as parents. As if things couldn't get any better, my dad came through with an unexpected gesture of support. While my mother and Rita were making their weak attempts at reconciliation, my dad had quietly been observing from the sidelines. He didn't say much during the family drama, but I think he understood more than I gave him credit for. One afternoon, he called me and asked if we could meet for lunch. I was hesitant at first, but I agreed. When we sat down, he didn't waste time with small talk. He got right to the point and told me that he wanted to help us with a down payment for a house. My dad wasn't typically one to make grand gestures, but this one meant the world to me. He told me that he had been saving up for a long time, and even though my mom didn't know about it, he wanted to use the money to help Lance and me get our first home. He said it was his way of apologizing for not standing up to my mom when I needed him the most. I could see how difficult this was for him, and it made me realize just how much he cared. My dad wasn't the type to express his emotions easily, but this gesture spoke volumes. I accepted his offer with gratitude, knowing that this was his way of showing his love and support in the only way he knew how.